Lena Walker had always been a fighter, but the battles she faced weren't the kind you could see in the office. Her struggle wasn't physical or even emotional, at least, not in the ways people usually recognized. It was a quiet war, fought in the silence of meetings, in the space between words that no one bothered to say aloud. For 5 years, Lena had been working at Titan Sports, a global leader in the sports industry, and though her passion and intelligence were undeniable, they seemed to go unnoticed. Every morning, Lena would walk into her office, a small cubicle surrounded by the hum of her colleagues' conversations. The glass walls of the building offered an unobstructed view of the city skyline, but it felt like a cage rather than a place of inspiration. Her coworkers often praised the grandeur of the view, but Lena rarely noticed it. She was too consumed by the thought that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how many extra hours she put in, she would never be seen. Over time, Lena had become accustomed to the fact that men in her department received promotions and acknowledgement while she was pushed aside. Her contributions were downplayed, and her ideas were often brushed off by the senior executives, most of whom were men. She started to internalize the messages, telling herself that she wasn't cut out for the kind of recognition she craved. That day, as she prepared for yet another important meeting, Lena overheard a conversation in the break room. Greg, one of the senior managers she had long respected, laughed as he spoke to his colleagues. "I don't even know why we still have Lena on the team. She doesn't contribute anything special," he said with a careless chuckle. The words were like a slap to the face, but Lena stayed silent, swallowing the bitterness that rose in her throat. It wasn't the first time she'd heard something like that, but today felt different. Lena felt a fire inside her that she hadn't felt in years. Something had shifted. She realized in that moment that she had been holding herself back for far too long. No more. She wouldn't let herself be defined by their words any longer. She wasn't just some invisible worker in the background of Titan Sports. She was someone with a voice, with ideas that mattered. That night, after returning to her apartment, Lena stood in front of the mirror, looking at her reflection. She was ready to stop being afraid. From that moment on, things were going to change. Lena was going to make sure of it. The next morning, Lena walked into the office with a quiet determination. Her usual calm was there, but something in her posture had shifted. The air in the office felt thick with anticipation, but she refused to let it intimidate her. She had something to prove now, not to them, but to herself. As she passed her colleagues in the hallway, their usual dismissive glances were gone. There was something different about her, and they couldn't quite place it. Lena didn't notice. She didn't care. The meeting that day was intense, as most of the team's meetings were. Greg led the discussion, as usual, barking out orders and dismissing suggestions without much thought. When he brushed off another colleague's proposal, Lena couldn't hold herself back. She had been silenced for far too long. She raised her hand, and as if all eyes on her were part of an unspoken agreement, the room fell into an uneasy silence. "Lena," Greg said, surprised by the interruption. Lena straightened in her chair. Her voice was calm but firm. "Actually, I think we're missing an important point here," she said, her gaze steady. Greg furrowed his brow, clearly unamused. "What's that?" he asked, his tone more dismissive than curious. Lena took a deep breath, feeling a calmness wash over her. "We're too focused on the immediate returns of this campaign," she began, her voice gaining strength. "The long-term impact we could have by broadening our target market isn't being given the attention it deserves. If we want to stay ahead of the competition, we need to start thinking beyond the obvious." Her colleagues exchanged glances, clearly caught off guard by the way Lena had taken control of the room. Greg opened his mouth to respond, but Lena cut him off before he could dismiss her. "I'm not saying we abandon the current approach," Lena continued. "I'm saying we need to expand it by appealing to an audience we've overlooked. This could drive our sales not just for this quarter, but for the next several years." There was a long pause before Greg spoke again, his face a mixture of surprise and frustration. "Lena, we're not here to brainstorm. Just stick to the numbers," he said, clearly trying to regain his footing. But Lena didn't back down. "I think the numbers will look a lot better if we do," she said quietly. She knew this was just the beginning. The small moment of defiance felt monumental. For the first time in a long time, Lena felt the power of her own voice. As the days went by, Lena's life at Titan Sports began to change. At first, nothing seemed different. The work remained the same. The meetings were still dominated by Greg and the other senior managers. But there was a shift, a quiet undercurrent that Lena could feel. She had spoken up. She had pushed back. And people were starting to take notice. In the days that followed, Lena's approach to her work began to change. Instead of hiding in the background, she made her presence known. She contributed in meetings, not with arrogance, but with conviction. Her ideas, once dismissed, were now being considered with greater respect. Slowly, Greg began to see the value in her suggestions. She wasn't just the quiet assistant anymore, she was a force to be reckoned with. Lena's impact wasn't dramatic or flashy, it wasn't the kind of power that demanded immediate attention. Instead, it was the kind of influence that built quietly, piece by piece. She would make small, calculated moves that got her noticed, not by showing off but by demonstrating the power of thoughtful, deliberate action. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. Her quiet strength was more than enough. One afternoon, after a particularly successful presentation, Greg called Lena into his office. He was no longer dismissive or condescending. Instead, he offered a quiet nod of approval. "You were right about the strategy," he admitted, the tone of his voice showing respect. "We've implemented your changes, and the results are looking promising. Keep it up." Lena smiled politely but said nothing. She didn't need more validation. The work spoke for itself. Her voice, once muted, had become her strength. The quiet rebellion that had started in a single meeting had now taken root in every aspect of her life. Lena had found her power, not in fighting against the system, but in knowing when to challenge it with grace and confidence. In the end, Lena realized that true power didn't come from loud protests or dramatic gestures. It came from the ability to quietly navigate the system, to know when to speak up and when to stand firm in silence. She had learned to embrace her voice, and in doing so, she had changed the course of her life forever.